I've done it wrong. And again. I don't know what's going on tonight. Having a proper boomer moment. And we are live. I know you saw my face a couple of times in the intro. That doesn't usually happen, but I am a bit of a boomer when it comes to technology. A little bit clueless. So welcome to tonight's stream. Don't usually stream on a Friday night, but you know what? Had an idea to celebrate the 1990s year by year. Oh, won't be every year. You know, I'll probably pick and choose a few iconic years of the 1990s to, you know, discuss. And I thought I've picked the perfect person tonight because this guy is just of the right age to discuss the 1990s. You know, he's a little bit younger than me, but he came of age in the 1990s. And yeah, we're just going to basically get on board and discuss 1996, which I think when you talk about 1990s, I think, you know, there's a few more iconic years when it comes to certainly pop culture and movies, certainly horror movies. Definitely a few more iconic years than 1996. So, to help me along with this little trip down memory lane, I have got Slasher Home Video. Chris, what's up, man?
What's up?
What's
I'm
up,
nervous.
man? Don't worry, man. Don't worry. I don't.
Always get nervous.
Yeah, so do I. Jesus. Just before we start our little introduction, let's just see who's in the chat. Bonnie Army's in the chat. What's up, guys? Kgra TDK, are you a new subscriber? Don't recognize that name, but if you are a new subscriber, thank you very much. We've got Big T as always. What's up, man? We've got Chris, who's Chris right here. Hopefully, I'm sure a few more people will be jumping on board, you know, as we move on. I'm never quite sure with a Friday night. Tuesday night's always a really good stream, you know what I mean? It always seems to be really popular. Yeah. I don't know with Friday nights though. With Friday night, it's just like it's going to be the same because Friday nights people like doing other stuff. Tuesday nights, it's a Tuesday night, you know, there's not really much else to do. Fridays, people may be going out, you know, bars, clubbing, you know, cinema, whatever. Well, hopefully a few people join in. But yeah, anyway, you know, when I came, I did do a similar video a couple of months ago about 1988, basically.
The best year.
But well, it was it was an idea that I came up with, but it was just me, you know, with nobody to bounce off because it was just I thought I'll try this, see how it goes. But obviously, when you've got no one to bounce off, it's kind of difficult because you're kind of like you're just talking constantly, and you haven't really got. But then I came up with the concept of when we started doing live streams with Piz, and obviously start talking to you, and you're a similar age to me, a little bit younger. Obviously, you grew up in the 90s, similar to me. I mean, I guess you consider yourself like a 90s kid completely.
Yeah.
Almost more with.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I remember the 80s, but like, I mean, I was like 8 years old, you know, so.
Yeah. I think if you're born being born in 76, I kind of like go between the 80s and the 90s because it's my entire teenage years with the 90s, but all my pre-teen years with the 80s. So I kind of crossed both decades in a way. I suppose you've been a few years younger. nearly all your childhood, what you remember of being a kid is the 90s more than me. But it's certainly a decade that, means a lot to me. Because, like I say, I was 13 in 1990. So I was, the important years of your life, 10 and 13 is a big deal. And it's
Yeah, well, see, I was about to turn 13 in 96. I was like, I was 12 going on 13 then. So
yeah. So those kind of early years, especially going into your teen years, the iconic part of your life at that time, like whether it's a movie or a TV show or a music, it sticks with you more than anything nowadays. As you get older, as you get older, decades just become. I mean, I can't remember if I see a film in 2007. I can't remember what even it could have come out in 2015. I'd be like, I can't remember what year it came out. I'm just like, oh, it came out roughly around between 2007 or 2015, and I can never quite remember exactly when it came. But when you're a kid, you can instinctively remember. It's almost like I can remember, going back to the 80s and 90s, every single movie that meant something to me, I can instinctively remember exactly what year that film came out.
Yeah, I remember days. I remember days around stuff like that. Like, like I remember the day I went and saw Demolition Man. I remember the whole day and the night before, just because of how, like, special that movie is to me and stuff. So yeah.
And that was 93.
Yeah.
Like I just instinctively remember it. I don't know why. I'm clicking on people's comments, but they're not showing up on the stream for some reason. Oh,
it is on my end.
Oh, can you see it? It's just on my end. It's like faint. It's like I can't really see it clearly. Is the stream messing up for anyone else? I hope not. I just want to make sure there's no issue. I mean, we seem to be fine. Big T says I just rebooted. Might have been on my end. Jamie's in the chat. It seems to be okay. Jamie's in the chat as well. Sean's just jumped on, so it must be okay. I think it may be just a problem with Big T. Yeah, he looks like Big T's back in the chat. But yeah, the comments for some reason are just not really showing up very clearly on my screen. But if they're showing up for you and they're showing up for everyone else, that's okay. But yeah, so basically, the whole idea of this was just to get, look back on a particular year of the 1990s and just discuss
some man. I made really rough scribbled notes.
Well, I've tried to think how can I structure it. So I've kind of and you're free to obviously jump in. I mean, obviously that's what you're here for, but I've tried to keep it structured a little bit. So kind of
that never works, man.
I know.
That never works.
I was trying to kind of keep it movies wise, kind of go 4 months at a time, go from January to April and discuss some of the movies at that time.
Oh man, you're going super organized.
I was trying. I wanted it to be kind of but I don't know if that's going to work. And then kind of discuss, go into the movies, then jump out to the movies and go into some of the TV shows and the rest. Are you a wrestling fan?
Well, see, that early, I don't remember dates.
But you know about the whole NWO 96.
Yeah.
You're well.
But see, I didn't remember that was 96. I mean, I think of that as late 90s, early 2000s. I never really had years tied to them. I remember right before Scott Hall and Kevin Nash left WWF and went over there, but I didn't know dates on it. But yeah, I mean, if you throw stuff at me, I'll probably know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, obviously we're going to talk about Scream, but I was going to keep that towards the end because Scream came out in December of 96. So I thought maybe build up to Scream because that's probably
that's the obvious one.
That's the obvious one, obviously. And plus it highlights how bad movies were in 96. Because looking back at 96, I just basically, I couldn't remember everything that came out, which was like a significant release.
Yeah,
Obviously,
there's not many.
There's not much at all in terms of horror. It's terrible in terms of horror. So
like
basically,
3 really good ones in my opinion, but that's it.
Well, let's say, so looking at the movies that came out from what I made a note of from January to April, a couple stand out. I mean, obviously, Dusk Till Dawn.
Yeah, that's on my list.
Yeah, that's obviously a major movie that like made George Clooney. Well, George Clooney was already a star, but this is Dusk Till Dawn a movie that made him a movie star. Do you think?
Was that before like Ocean's 11 and stuff?
Yeah. This is a good 5 years. Ocean's 11 was 2001, so this is I think this is the first movie like proper. He did do a couple of really bad straight to DVD movies in the early 90s.
I think I remember those. And didn't he start on like ER or some TV show like that?
Yeah, I think he started off in the 80s in like some really bad sitcom, but ER made him a TV star. But I think Dusk Till Dawn was his first actual movie frontman role where he actually played the leading role in a movie, and obviously starring alongside Quentin Tarantino, that really made him a big name in the movies. I'm just trying to remember what was the second film after Dusk Till Dawn. I think he did another bit. He did a movie with Jennifer. Was it Jennifer Lopez? Was it out?
I have no idea.
He did a movie.
It's kind of crazy to me that Dusk Till Dawn was his first. I never really thought of that was his first like big movie role. I never really thought about it though.
I could be wrong. I'm sure it was Dusk Till Dawn was his first big movie role. I know he did a movie a year or two later with, I want to say Jennifer Lopez. Is it Jennifer Lopez? Yeah, I think it's Jennifer Lopez. It might be Out of Sight. Out of Sight, yeah.
Is that the one with Don Cheadle's in it too?
I've never seen the film. I just know that was a film that Sean says Out of Sight. Yeah, I've never seen the film.
That's the one. I think I remember it.
I think that's the one where he kind of went really big. Like as he kind of became, rather than just like that sort of leading man role, sort of suave, sophisticated, good-looking guy who gets the girl and that. Whereas obviously Dusk Till Dawn was a little bit more like he was not really an action man role, but he was kind of like more the cool guy. But Out of Sight was definitely the role that got him like that sort of like the attention of like all the women in the world rather than just people who watch DR. Obviously a couple of 12 Monkeys as well from the beginning of the year, which was kind of like, obviously Brad Pitt was still on a hot streak with Seven, and obviously he went into this. This was like a Bruce Willis movie, but 12 Monkeys is a film that I've never really sort of like warmed to, but in terms of the movies from '96, it's one that does stand out because, like you say, 1996 is not the best year in my opinion for like cinema releases. It was really, and obviously I'll just mention a couple of others. Broken Arrow with John Travolta and Christian Slater. Hellraiser Bloodline. That's how bad things were in '96. That was our horror movie. This is how bad horror was in 1996. Hellraiser Bloodline is one of the only horror movies released in 1996.
Well, wasn't that was the first direct-to-video one, wasn't it? I think so.
I don't know, because according to Wikipedia, it's the way they've listed it, I was under the impression that they only listed cinema releases from 1996.
I might be wrong, but I thought it was the first direct-to-video.
It could be, but it's just that they listed it as like high-profile releases of 1996.
And so, to be fair, Sean McManus says it's not that bad. It's not. It was at least still written as a Hellraiser movie and not just another script, but it was a slow decline. Like,
so Bloodline was the fourth film, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Or was it the fifth? Yeah. I couldn't have, because I remember obviously the first three after that, it gets a little bit murky for me. I mean, they get the
Well,
titles.
the other ones are just not even Hellraiser movies, really.
Yeah. And a couple of a film that like I always believed was an older movie, which I thought was a movie from the early 90s, is Screamers with Peter Weller, which I think is a really solid movie. You know, like a sci-fi one.
I don't even know what that is. I don't think.
It's Peter Weller, obviously RoboCop. It's like set on like I suppose it's got like a bit of a, I wouldn't say pitch black vibe to it. It's obviously it's on another planet, and there's these like mechanical creatures that go underground, and the screamers comes from the noise they make, and they attack people. I can't remember that much about the movie, but it feels like an early it's got like it's more like an early 90s movie, really. You know, if you think about the early 90s with like the whole cyborgs and machine, you know, all the Terminator rip-offs of like intelligent machines, it's got more of an early 90s feel. And I thought it was an early 90s film, but apparently it was 1996. So I was like amazed by that.
Well, 96 is whenever like that's when things changed. So a lot of things did feel like early 90s still, because like that's the year things changed.
Yeah. One of the common occurrences like for like 496 I was noticing as well is looking at movies like Executive Decision with Kurt Russell, and obviously Broken Arrow. I mean, obviously, I think the following year had like Con Air, The Rock, and Face Off. A lot of these movies were kind of like about, you know, narcissistic. They're just like they were like a lot of like narcissistic lunatics who wanted to like, you know, start off a nuclear, very much like James Bond villains who like wanted to like start a nuclear war or do, you know, this insidious plan to like take over, like if not the world, then I guess some part of the world. And it's just, I just think that, I mean, I'd like to know your opinion, but I think 9/11 kind of like just put an end to all that sort of those sort of storylines, which is like
probably
after 9/11, you know, the whole idea of like, you know, the nuclear attacks on big cities or just like any sort of attack, it kind of like went sort of like, well, yeah, we're not going to be doing this anymore. You know, it was very much a 90s thing that, you know, like the whole. But that was just seemed to be the popular thing in the mid to late 90s. Just, you know, crazy madman wants to hijack a bomb or do this, do that, but 1986 was kind of like 1997 was kind of like the peak time for these sorts of movies.
Well, that's one of those things where they all like Face Off and Broken Arrow blend together for me.
Yeah.
7 and 12 Monkeys, stuff like that. Like they're so similar that they kind of blend together for me. I don't know.
I mean, I think, you know, I'll try and stay on the 1996 sort of focus, but I think with the way 7 kind of came out of movies like Silence of the Lambs as well, where, you know, with the 80s we had like these sort of like, you know, supernatural monsters like Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger, who were not really relatable. They were just fun bad guys. And as you got into the 1990s, it kind of became a lot more serious villains, you know, like real life serial killers who could be the guy next door. The cinema kind of moved away from the whole supernatural killers, and 7, I suppose, was kind of just the end point for that sort of movie. You know, it being building up through the 1990s with films like Silence of the Lambs, Copycat as well with Sigourney Weaver, which was one of those sort of like serial killer type movies. And then we finally got to 7, which was kind of like, you know, one of the ultimate sort of like serial killer movie. And then obviously into 96, and then obviously Scream, which we'll talk about later. And it all kind of went back to like, luckily for us, for me, well, you know, certainly I was just glad to get back to, you know, stupid serial killers just doing stupid stuff. And, you know, I'd had enough of like the serious serial killers.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to myself.
Yeah. So anyway, you go. You hit me up with some of your.
Well, I've got Fear. These are just
Yeah.
movies that I watched a lot. They're not necessarily like you're naming like Broken Arrow and stuff. I was watching Fear with Mark Wahlberg, The Craft, which I'm surprised you didn't mention because that was kind of like Nev
I did
Campbell.
see that. Yeah, I did see that, and yeah,
and Happy Gilmore. That was
oh
like
yeah.
because that was the big, like, I think it was Billy Madison first, but Happy Gilmore was like the big one that made him like a household name, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
And then I've got, Screaming From Dusk Till Dawn. From Dusk Till Dawn, I watched that on a screener copy that somebody had gotten from the video store. And I didn't even know it was a horror movie. I thought it was a Tarantino crime movie. So when it got to the halfway point, I was like blown away because I didn't see it coming at all. So,
was this before? Just by the time Dusk Till Dawn had come round, Tarantino's name was getting used on everything. So even though he was like, I know he was in the film, but he didn't
Tarantino
direct it.
Presents.
But they kind of like tried to use Tarantino's name for any little thing. Like I think they did it with like might have been
They did it with Hostel.
Yeah. I was gonna say yeah.
I think they did it with a couple of Robert Rodriguez movies. It was just like because they were doing that before with Wes Craven too.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely.
It's just like the ultimate trick. They can just technically say like Quentin Tarantino Presents, and people just assume it's one of his movies. Yeah, and it's just like a movie he like gave his blessing to or something. I guess I don't know.
Yeah, that was just a big deal at the time. People, the average person. I seem to remember a story. The whole like the Sharknado movies and movies that rip off, big budget movies. The company who the name escapes me, but the company behind Sharknado, Asylum, they caught onto the fact this. I think in the early days when we still had video stores, they caught onto the fact that people would walk into the video store and they wouldn't even they just see a movie that sounded like what was a big movie, and they just say, "Oh, well, just that's the movie we wanted," and they'll just grab it. And so they intentionally make a movie like a big hit movie and quickly knock it out, get it into video stores, and
I used to stop people in video stores because I would see like an old lady or something grabbing like Paranormal Entity instead of Paranormal Activity, and I'd be like, "That's not the one you want. you want this one."
I'm not quite sure how it works now with streaming, how they get away with it, but I mean, it blows my mind to think how some of these movies even make, any money, because some of these movies are just. I mean, I know they cost little money to make, but I can't think who's watching them. I mean, there's a movie that Piz watched for his Patreon called House Shark. It was like a shark that like comes up through a toilet and just eats people, and you do wonder like who's actually. Have you froze, Chris? I think Chris is frozen. So we'll just yeah, Chris is frozen. Is the chat still okay? Chat, let me know. Is Chris is no okay? Chris has disappeared briefly. Hopefully he'll come back. Give me a chance to catch up with the chat anyway. So the chat's still all good, hopefully. So let me just go back to Jamie. What's up, Jamie? Thanks for joining. Sean, what's up, man? Big T, I think I said hello to. Ben Grimm, what's up, man? Big T says 96 years the greatest superhero and holiday movie of all time. Taylor Man, Jingle All the Way. Sean Dennis Carter. Big T was only 6 years old in 96. Cable Guy. I never liked Cable Guy. Kegra. I think it's a very divisive movie. Cable Guy. Independence Day is number one. We'll get to, if Chris comes back, we'll get to Independence Day. Hopefully Chris comes back. He'll just have to go back into his emails and Ben says, "Oh, and Trista did a premiere here in Oklahoma City as it takes place in the state, and the stars coming on to my little theatre. It was a big deal. A local workman were in the movie." Sean says, "We're forgetting Batman and Rob McClooney." That was 97, I think, Sean. I think so. I think that was 97. So how old are you? Someone in the chat in 96. Kegger was 12. Sean was 7. I feel really old now. The last great decade. I think what the people who call it the last great decade, I think it depends on how old you are. I suppose a lot of people who are like coming of age now may call the 2010s the last great decade. I think it's just a matter of opinion, really, isn't it? My mum and dad would probably call the 60s the last great decade. Oh yeah, that's true. And the 90s, you could wear your heart on your sleeve and your mouth underneath your nose. It was a time when we weren't afraid of four-letter words, and she was always spoken. Absolutely. Griffin says, the chat, it's a little bit slow tonight. The chat coming on the screen, I'm not quite sure what's going on there. 12 Monkeys, 7 and Screams were all released in 95. Might check the date on your list that you were reading. Oh, so I know 7 was 1995. Griff. I was just making reference to that. 12 Monkeys and Screamers. I mean, I'm basing it on Wikipedia. Now, obviously, Wikipedia is not, the be all and end all in terms when it comes to. It does say 12 Monkeys was January 96, so maybe it's basing it on a UK release and not an American release. I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, definitely 7 was definitely 95, yeah. But it doesn't really matter because I'm probably not going to do a 1995 or 97 anyway, in terms of like 90s. It's probably going to be, might pick one from the early 90s, do a 96, and maybe do like late 90s, like 99. If I did every year in the 90s, there'd just be too much crossing over with like the same stuff. So it wouldn't really make much sense. Like 15 of the last great decade. Oh, Jonathan's in the chat. What's up, man? My favourite red coat. So Chris has put perfect timing. So I'm guessing Chris. So we'll just, if Chris can get back in the chat, just a little, I don't know what, if he's obviously having internet problems by the looks of it. There's not some major storm in Kentucky, is there? I'll just keep talking to the chat while hopefully Chris gets his internet sorted. I thought it'd be my internet which crashed tonight usually, but still a bit nervous having a guest on. But so I thought he was deep in thought as well, Big T. I just thought he was just listening intently to me, and I thought, no, he's not moving there at all. So yeah, let's put out to you guys. So what are your what are your memories of 1996 then? Okay, no storm, just kicked out for no reason. Hopefully it'll be right in a minute. So there's supposed to be a big storm in Kentucky soon. We'll try and get this stream out the way before that kicks in. I've just learned that Kentucky's in 2 time zones. The whole of the UK is not even in 2 time zones, but like one state in America is in 2 time zones. That's how big America is. Always blows my mind how big America is. Like, what's a small journey to you? It's like a drive across the country for me. I consider like an hour's drive a long way, whereas for you guys, it's probably like going down the road. let me just see. So we've discussed the first 4 months of the year. What we're gonna do is, if Chris can, hopefully Chris can get his internet sorted, we'll jump back on. We're gonna go into hopefully talk about some video games from the 90s, 1996. So let you guys throw in some video. Yeah, so you guys in the chat, video games from 1996. Obviously, the Sony PlayStation came out in 95. But right at the end of the year, 1996 was kind of like when all the games started coming out, and the same with the Sega Saturn, and obviously you had the N64 that came out that year. So it's like, it was a big year for consoles as well. And Griffin says, "So why did you pick that?" It was literally, Griff. It was just an idea that, picking a year that was kind of had something culturally relevant, to horror specifically, in terms of like with Scream coming out that year, because I think that was kind of the year that the whole horror genre just like completely was turned on its head because of that movie. So I think it was an important. That's why I thought it's a good year to choose. In terms of like the early 90s and the very late 90s, if you were going to go into like 97, 98, 99, well, half the films we'd be talking about would have been influenced by Scream. So it just made sense to start off with 96. Like I say, I wouldn't do every year in the 1990s. It would be pointless. It just makes sense to maybe pick 3 years, maybe one in the early 90s, 96, and I say maybe 99. And maybe go into the 2000s a little bit as well. I mean, the 80s is more difficult because if you're going to get, real sort of like, honestly good feedback off someone. I mean, Chris is probably a little bit too young for that, and it's like the only person I really know who've live streamed would be Lorne for that. But Lorne's like, Lorne's usually pretty busy, so that's why I just thought choose the 90s. But yeah, so Chris, are you going to be able to jump back on if you're still there? Oh, he's back. He's back. Okay.
What's up? I'm back.
And he's back. He's back.
Sorry, that was just the worst timing ever. It just kicked off for no reason. I'm not sure why.
I was talking. I was like, Chris is like, someone in the chat said, Chris is just, it's like listening intently. And I was like, he is. And I went, oh, he's not moving. It's just.
Sorry, man.
No, it's no problem. No problem. It gave me a chance to catch up with the chat anyway. So I've been on to chat with the chat a little bit.
There you go. Silver lining.
I'm trying to think where we're up to. I think can you know what we were talking about? I think it was just
not really.
Towards, I think we were just talking about. I think I was just discussing the 80s paranormal villains and how it became a bit more serious in the 90s.
Yeah.
Well, we've done the first sort of covered the first 4 months of movies from that year. So I was going to briefly go into, obviously you play video games, right?
Not so much anymore.
But you did back then, though. Oh yeah, but so back in the 90s. Because
the big one's Resident Evil. I'm gonna go ahead and throw that one out there. That's
was it?
Was it 96? That's when I played it.
Yeah, I think. It was 96. Yeah. So basically, PlayStation 1 came out the tail end of 95, along with the Sega Saturn, and then the N64. This is in America, by the way. And then in 96, the N64 came out. So I did make a note of a few, the whole, because obviously I bought a PlayStation 1. I don't know what did you buy back in the day? Did you buy a PlayStation 1? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Resident Evil was kind of like early on 96. I bought that game, thought it was great, even though it was hard to kind of move the character around. It was quite awkward, like just moving
that was
around.
part of the genius of it, that it made you feel helpless.
Yeah.
That game blew me away. I was already into Romero movies, and like I just remember thinking like, dude, like this is like I'm in Night of the Living Dead. And I was just like that's like the big video game for me in my life. Dude, I was like sucked into that game hard.
Well, the great thing about that game as well is, obviously there were issues with trying to control the character, but it's just like the scene where the dog jumps through the window. It's towards the beginning of the game, and
Yeah.
you're just trying to frantically move your character away. The fact that it's so difficult to just move anywhere, it just makes it just amps up the terror of the game.
Yeah, and then when you finally start getting a grip on the controls a little bit, they throw those like hunters at you, I think they're called.
Yeah.
Which are actually fast and can like track you down, so you have to like step it up more. Like it's a really well designed game.
I mean, obviously everybody there's a few videos on YouTube about like just the voice acting in the game, how bad it is.
It was awesome back then because you weren't even used to having voice acting or like full motion video. You were used to like text scrolling, so it was crazy.
It's just the opening scene as well with like the sort of like the I don't know what they used, like for the opening introduction to the game with like it's like CGI characters at the beginning and going towards the mansion, and they look like melted candles. The faces are all kind of like.
What a mansion! That's the line that always sticks with you.
There's a really famous line, and I can't remember what it is, but there's a few. But there's a video on YouTube of just the best one-liners.
Like you were almost a Jill sandwich. I know that's one.
Yeah. That's definitely one. Yeah, it's just some of the. I don't know where they get this from. It's like, Anthony's in the chat. What's up, Anthony? It's taking such a long time for the comments to change over on this stream tonight. I don't know what's going on. Big T mentions Crash Bandicoot. That was one that I did make a note of as well. Yeah, Crash Bandicoot was debut in '96 as well.
And Parappa the Rapper. Big T mentioned that one.
Oh yeah, I've never. Was that a Nintendo? Was that what?
It was PlayStation.
Was it?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I think I had a demo of it. Because remember demo discs?
Yeah.
That's how I played most games. I just had like stacks of demo discs. I didn't even have the games.
Yeah. Obviously, another like noticeable release from '96 was Tomb Raider. That was kind of like one of the big ones. If you look at games that came out, look at some of the games that came out in '96, which are still going strong. Obviously, Tomb Raider, Resident Evil, the Pokemon games debuted in '96 as well. I mean, who would have thought that Pokemon would have become as big a deal as it is now, 20 years later? But
that wasn't even part of my world. I didn't even have a Game Boy.
No.
I didn't even know about it until the TV show or whatever.
Obviously, Super Mario 64 as well. That was. I mean, I don't know if Ocarina of Time. I think that was a year or two later. But when the N64 dropped, they were putting out some of the greatest games of all time. I was just never I was Super Nintendo, but then moved to PlayStation as I got older, and Nintendo kind of just seemed like a bit like kiddie-ish for me. But by that point, because obviously by '96 I was like 19, so I was looking for something a bit more adult, and Nintendo was still putting out these, games with no blood, and I always remember like Mortal Kombat on the Super Nintendo. It was green blood instead of red blood, where Sega had obviously the the just uncut. I'm trying to remember.
I had a Sega, and all my friends had Super Nintendos, so I was like the only kid in my neighborhood with a Sega.
What year was Night Trap? Do you remember Night Trap, the Sega CD game, which caused loads of controversy? It was like a bunch of like.
It had to have been around that time, probably. Like I remember they used to give you these ads in the game boxes. They were like fold-out posters with ads on the other side, and they would show like they would have Sega Genesis, Sega CD, and 32X in sections with all their games. So I bet Night Trap was probably like 93, 94, something like that, maybe.
I think the Sega CD came out before the Saturn, but I can't. I think it was definitely.
Yeah,
But I just remember did Night Trap cause like the control? Did that get the controversy in the US that it got in the UK? I mean, that game was kind of like.
I don't even think you could like really get it. I mean, I don't know. Sega CD was one of those things that was like an add-on that rich kids got. I was never gonna get a Sega CD.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't know if you could even get the game. I just remember everybody saying it was like violent, which I don't think it actually is. I think that was just an assumption.
I think it was just the idea of like young girls like scantily clad with like these masked killers coming in to try and kill them. It just like people just like lost their minds and never even played the game. But I just seem to that, you know, this was kind of like peak sort of video games at evil time. You know, the mid '90s. There was a guy in the States. Dan's in the chat. Dan will probably know this. There was a guy in the States in like the '90s, I think going into the noughties, and he was constantly calling for violent video games to be banned. He was saying that, you know, corrupting kids and responsible for shootings and stuff. And he was, I think, especially when Grand Theft Auto came out, he was just constantly going on TV saying, you know, these games are evil and they need to be banned. And it was just like, oh,
more likely somebody on Fox News like Bill O'Reilly or something like that, probably.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't remember the guy's name, but I just remember he was just constantly. Even over here, we got him. I think he came over to the UK a few times and was just banging on about, you know, our video games are evil and this is going to lead to the corruption of children. And kids were just like, shut up. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just nonsense, you know. I mean, my boy's 18 now, and he was playing like Call of Duty when he was like 8, and he's perfectly okay. It didn't do him any harm.
Well, I watched Hellraiser when I was 8.
Yeah,
I'm not a psycho. Like, no. You know, that stuff is so stupid.
It is. It really is. You know, if you're 8 years old and you're like, you know, torturing animals, then you probably are going to end up being a psychopath. If you're just playing a video game or watching horror movies, it's not really going to.
Man, you got a healthy outlet.
Yeah. Oh, I think Griffin's right. He said a guy called Jack Thompson. That's the guy. Yeah, Jack Thompson. Yeah, he was kind of like just offended by everything all the time. So, I mean, I can imagine when Grand Theft Auto came out, he was just like absolutely, you know.
Oh, man, he must have died. They're killing hookers.
Yeah. I know. Well,
one more game before we get off of that, if we're about to, is Duke Nukem 3D.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't make it. Yeah, that was definitely.
That game was awesome, and I played it constantly because it was basically like Bruce Campbell running around killing like alien mutants.
Are they still making those Duke Nukem games, or is that kind of?
I heard something about something new coming, but I just remember on PlayStation 3 they made one, and it was like had a big marketing campaign, and it wasn't that good. And I think that was kind of the death sentence. Yeah. So I think they took like a decade to make it, and they were showing all of these awesome screenshots and stuff, and then it just wasn't that good.
So we're going back to movies. So this is covering the movies from I think it's May to September, May to July maybe. I've lost track, but certainly I don't know whether this was the beginning of like the kind of like this sort of disaster movie style, but Twister, obviously with Bill Paxton. Now this kind of like, I'm not saying this started it, but there was a wave of like disaster movies in the mid to late 90s, where it was if it wasn't alien invasion, it was natural disasters. movies like Deep Impact, Armageddon. Twister was on like a lower level because obviously it was just focused on a part of the States, but that was kind of like the way they were going. If you that part of the 19, as well as those these crazy action movies with the crazy bad guy, Independence Day, which we'll get to, it was always like sort of impending disaster for me. It was outer space, or it was and like movies like I think if we move to 97, Dante's Peak, Volcano, natural disasters or alien invasion, that was just like the big thing in the late 90s or mid to late 90s, which has kind of disappeared again a little bit. But it's just interesting when you go back and look at a certain 5-year snapshot, how so many movies kind of do merge into one almost. So,
yeah, and I remember Twister was huge. People acted like it was Jaws.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny going back and looking at all the movies that were like that nobody talks about anymore. But I remember Twister was huge when it came out. And they were acting like it was going to be like a timeless classic that nobody would ever forget. And I haven't heard anybody bring it up in a decade. So,
I mean, like I say, 96 wasn't the best year for movies, but as we obviously went into the summer, for the blockbusters, we did have the first Mission Impossible film, which I was never a fan of. But I mean, it's a movie now. To think that franchise is still going, 26 years later, if you look at that movie, you wouldn't look at that movie and think that would start a franchise that would be going. It's kind of become bigger and bigger and bigger as time's gone on. Because after 2, which was just a terrible film in my opinion, I would have thought that franchise was dead. But then 3 was an improvement, and then it was the Mission Impossible franchise is a bit like the Fast and the Furious franchise. It's kind of become like just bigger than the sum of its parts, if that makes any sense. It's just become something that I don't think anyone could have predicted would have become this massive, to the point where you just wonder where it's going to go next.
I've never even watched a Mission Impossible movie.
Well, I've not seen the more recent ones, but I mean,
who was in the first Mission Impossible? It wasn't Tom Cruise, was it?
Yeah, it was Tom Cruise. Yeah,
it was.
Yeah. There's that famous scene.
He's still with it, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's like the one constant throughout the franchise. There's a famous scene. There's that one famous scene in the film where he kind of he comes down to a building on a kind of a
zip line thing, or not zip line, but
yeah.
Bungee cord or whatever.
That's the famous scene from the film that everyone remembers.
Yeah.
But it was just overcomplicated. I found it dull, and some people obviously took off for whatever reason, and I think they've made it a lot more mainstream, a lot more suited to a mainstream audience now, with a lot more action. But yeah, it's not my thing really. But a couple of other notable entrants, obviously The Rock, which was keeping on that idea of not like a disaster, but it was like that all action movie with big explosions, special effects. It was just so much of a 96 film, and obviously Eraser with Arnie, which I kind of felt like Arnie was kind of on his downward trajectory at this point.
Well, that's when action movies started getting more dramatic and more special effects heavy, which I still don't like. I didn't even like at the time. It wasn't about a badass being a badass. It was just explosions and drama.
Yeah.
I mean, not my thing.
Arnie kind of, after Terminator 2, he was kind of after that was the last great film he did for me. I mean, by the mid-90s.
You don't like Last Action Hero, man?
I like it.
It's one of my favorites.
I like the movie, but in terms of him just playing a badass serious sort of, with like Terminator 2 is like the last great film for me. Like, because I do like True Lies, but I don't know. There's something about Arnie just up to that point, and then by True Lies, he's starting to become he is like a middle-aged man at this point, and it's just not quite the same, badass sort of. He's not like Predator Arnie, he's just like big and enormous and just.
Yeah, nobody ever replaced him. That's another big thing.
No,
like nobody ever took up that mantle after he went down. Like,
no, definitely not.
And nobody ever will, probably.
Obviously, talk about Independence Day, because that was the blockbuster of '96. That movie kind of just was. I mean, I think it was released on July the 3rd, obviously one day before Independence Day in America, but everybody remembers that movie. I think everybody went to see that movie. I mean, I certainly went to see it. It's the film that made Will Smith.
Well,
I think he did Bad Boys '95.
Oh, did he?
That was kind of like his first big role.
I thought it was Independence Day.
I think Bad Boys was the year before. I think so. And I think that was what got him the role in Independence Day. But that's kind of what just made Will Smith like mainstream, as he can get. That just set him off on
like a legitimate actor.
Well, I mean, Men in Black was Men in Black was '97, so he did this, then he did Men in Black. By this point,
Wild West after that.
Yeah, well, luckily that didn't derail his career too much, because that was obviously a bit of a disaster. But I mean, did you go and what your memories of? Did you see Independence Day when it came out, or?
No, that was one that we were home video people.
Yeah,
but we a theater experience at that age with my parents was like a special occasion kind of thing. So if we didn't rent it on home video, I usually didn't see it. And that's probably one that I watched years later on TV once it got on TV. So
Christian's in the chat. What's up, Christian? We've got some YouTube royalty in the chat tonight, guys. Hey, what's up, man? Yeah, so one thing I know I'm trying to keep it as American centric as possible, because obviously it's all American. I know all the American stuff. I'm not entirely sure that a lot of the American audience are too up on the British stuff, but Trainspotting.
Trainspotting was big over here.
I wasn't sure whether that would really. I know it was a bit of a cult. I wasn't sure if it's just a cult film over in America, but if it actually had any impact. But obviously, Ewan McGregor being the starring role has probably over the years as well has given it a more of a, pushed it into the mainstream a bit. But Trainspotting was a fucking fantastic film. I mean, I love Trainspotting so much. It's just that had a massive cultural impact on the music as well. I bought the album, the soundtrack. The soundtrack is fantastic. But yeah, it's a really good advert for not taking heroin as well.
And Dan asked what my go-to mom and pop video store was. It was called Waxworks. It was a record store with a video store, it was half and half, and they had everything.
What is a mom? Because I always hear this when I watch American YouTubers. What is a mom and pop store?
Just a non-franchise store, a local business.
So like an independent.
Yeah, because I mean, before Blockbuster, that's what video stores were.
Yeah.
Blockbuster kind of came in and shut them all down and bought them out. Mm-hmm. But
see, I thought mom and pop was like a franchise, like a Blockbuster. It was called mom and pop.
No, that's just a blanket term for all the local business type places.
Yeah. And the thing is now as well, it's people now have nostalgia for Blockbuster, even though they were kind of like the Amazon of the day. The way streaming services like Netflix and Amazon have just completely wiped out independent video stores.
Well, that's a thing.
Blockbuster did the same to mom and pop stores.
Now people are really nostalgic for Blockbuster, But back in the day, people hated them.
Yeah.
I remember my mom was pissed whenever our video store shut down. We had two. We had Waxworks and Movie Warehouse. And Blockbuster came in and shut down, and my mom was pissed. And like they didn't have they like homogenized your selection. They didn't have like all the crazy shit that mom and pop stores had, because they would buy whatever and it would just stay on the shelf forever until the tape broke. But Blockbuster had it down to like they only got certain titles, and they were usually big movies, and that was kind of like the death of like more obscure stuff. So yeah, that back in the day, people weren't big on Blockbuster.
I mean, I remember like growing up, you know, at the video store, like what an independent video store, one end of the, not literally, you know, one end of the street. You literally come out of my road, go onto a main road, walk down there to be one independent video store. I could go the other direction and walk 100 yards up the street to be another video store. And they were around until the late 80s, early 90s, but then a Blockbuster opened, you know, about 2 miles away. And I think within a year or two, the independent stores had closed down, and Blockbuster was like running the show. But the thing about Blockbuster, it's with the Blockbusters, is like you go into the independent. I don't know if it was the same in the mom and pop stores. It probably was. In these stores, you go into them, and like the top shelf all around the entire video store was just porn. Whereas Blockbuster,
ours were back rooms with curtains.
Oh right,
you couldn't go back there.
It's just it's the UK. We didn't care in the UK. No, you could just anyone could just look at them, but they'd be side on, so you'd have to like kind of like pull it. And obviously, when you're little kids, they were too high for you to reach, but they were just there for anyone to see. But
well, that's that thing where in America we're scared of sex and y'all are scared of violence, right?
Yeah.
So ours was behind a curtain.
Yeah.
And you weren't allowed anywhere near it. I stuck my head in once when I was a kid. But yeah. Ours were completely out of view.
In Britain, the attitude to sex in Britain is kind of like, if you look at Europe, like, you know, some like the Scandinavian countries or Germany, they just don't give a shit about it. They really don't give a shit about nudity. You know, it's like we're kind of like prudish compared to them. Because they don't care. They, you know, go to Amsterdam in Holland. You know, literally, it's just like live sex shows in windows. It's just, that was basically. I think that's covered. Oh, one more movie I did want to mention, which, I couldn't like let 96 go by, but mention Escape from LA. Obviously, the sequel.
I love Escape from LA. I like Escape from LA more than Escape from New York.
Oh, that's controversial. That's a controversial statement.
I don't care.
You do have some controversial takes, though, Chris. I mean, you know, your Friday the 13th ranking is considered controversial. But
I mean, that's the kind of stuff I watched Escape from LA way before I saw Escape from New York, and it's just more. Like, that's the kind of stuff that was coming out in the 90s. It was just more about fun and more cheesy. And that's just kind of where my tastes go.
The one thing about Escape from LA, which dates the film a little bit, is like the shark, which looks like there's a scene with the shark, and it looks like something from like a really bad video game. And I was like,
no. It looked amazing back then, though. It's kind of like it's on par with that shark in Back to the Future 2 that comes up out of the fountain, the like hologram shark.
Anthony says one of my first memories of renting a film was Wishmaster. Wishmaster, I think, was 97, if I remember rightly. Wishmaster, great movie. Great movie.
Wishmaster 2 is good too.
Yeah, I don't know how many. I think how many Wishmaster films has there been now?
4 of them.
4.
I haven't watched 3 and 4. I heard they're pretty bad. I haven't. I just never got around to watching them yet, but I love 1 and 2. 2's hilarious.
I love in the first movie, the scene with the he's trying to get into a building, and the security guards go, and you can't get past, and he says, "Oh, you can't get," so because he's not allowing him through.
Yeah, that's Kane Hodder.
Oh yeah, oh is it?
Yeah. And he puts them in the glass, and it doesn't even really make sense. Like, I never understood if he was crushed against the glass or if he was inside the door.
Yeah, but oh yeah, some of the kills in that movie are so good. Okay, so we'll jump out of the films again briefly, but so just go into like obviously the wrestling in '96, NWO. That was just the one. I wasn't really going to talk about wrestling too much, but 1996 was kind of like one of the most iconic years for like WWE, well WWF at the time, WCW. WWF was.
Yeah, I think it was bigger for WCW, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Well,
bit. WWF had been too big for that. Had been so big for that long that they were kind of resting on the laurels a bit, and they'd like basically dropped the ball. So they were kind of like they'd grown tired. They'd lost Hulk Hogan, and obviously at this point, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall had left to go to WCW. They had these really really bad gimmicks with like wrestlers who wrestlers who wrestled as the job. So they had like a guy who's like
Repo Man.
Duke the Dumpster Josie, he was like a bin man, a garbage man,
and the dentist.
Really, yeah.
Was Kane?
That was Kane. That was Isaac Yankem.
Yeah.
It's really, really dumb, ideas and.
But hey, one of them though, Doink the Clown.
Yeah.
That was a really good gimmick. If you should go watch Doink the Clown. I think it was his first or second match.
When he was evil, an amazing character. When he was evil, I liked the character, but then he became a good guy, and it was like it just wasn't really the same.
Well, they replaced him.
Oh, right.
The original guy who came up with the gimmick was playing it like a creepy clown, and it was awesome. But then, Vince McMahon probably was just like, "Well, you're a fucking dude in makeup, so I'll just replace you if you're gonna be difficult."
Yeah,
and that's whenever it turned into like a cartoon character.
But obviously, Hulk Hogan was already at WCW as a face, and then obviously Hall and Nash went over, formed obviously the NWO. Hogan joined, and that just like kickstarted the whole Monday Night Wars because they were starting to do something which WWF weren't prepared for. So they basically kickstarted the whole Attitude Era. Without the NWO forming, we may never have got Stone Cold Steve Austin or Rock. They were in such a bad place at the time, and the whole I'm not entirely sure when it was. Someone in the chat will know, but the whole King of the Ring '96. So it would have been around the summer when Stone Cold won, and he did this famous speech where he just basically, did his 316 speech. I think that would have been around about maybe July '96, and I think the NWO formed a month or two before that, with with Hogan turning heel. So I think that was kind of a response to the NWO, and then obviously Stone Cold just went on to become like obviously one of the biggest stars, in history. And The Rock at that point was starting to. I think The Rock started to transition about a year or two later, and you had then DX came into the fray, maybe about '97.
So that's ripped off NWO.
Yeah, basically, yeah. But I mean, I used to love some of the DX stuff where they went to was it Atlanta, where the WCW they filmed every episode of WCW was filmed in one location. I think it was in Atlanta, whereas WWE would always move around the country. But I seem to remember there was one episode of Raw where Triple H and Shawn Michaels
and they're in the tank.
They just turned up and just I was like, oh, that's just so.
They were gonna invade WCW.
Yeah. That was, but I mean, that was just. I mean, go from '96 to like the early 2000s.
And
like that.
One real quick, another thing they were doing that was hilarious were those promos where they would all come out and like it was them and Nation of Domination. And like The Rock would dress up like Triple H with like a big nose. And then they would come back and one of them would be dressed like Owen Hart or something like that. And they would be doing impersonations. That shit was gold, dude.
Some of the Rock promos as a heel were just like so good. I mean, it's just the only problem, like obviously with the whole wrestling scene, you know, back in they would chop and change so much from like heel to face, and it was almost too much to take up, you know, and it did get a little bit ridiculous sort of towards the end of the decade. I mean, the corporate ministry where like the Ministry of Darkness with the Undertaker then merged with the McMahon family, and you had this like stable of like 20 people, and it was just getting beyond the joke by this point. And the NWO, I mean, what started off as like, you know, the three main guys, every single week somebody new would join, like the Giants, like the Big Show and then somebody else would join, and somebody else. It was just like
it got to the point where they would come out with 20 dudes in the ring.
Yeah,
they had like Kurt Hennig and Bischoff and like just like half the roster was in the ring while Scott Hall cut a promo.
I think that's, I mean, in terms of wrestling, I didn't really want to cover any more. I think that just 96 was just an important year for wrestling in terms of like, you know, I had to mention it. Very briefly, I mean, I was looking at TV shows that like debuted in 96, and there wasn't much that really stood out to me in terms of like, you know, what we're into. But I don't know if you remember a TV show called Millennium with Lance Henriksen. It was a really dark sort of like very much, I think it was meant to be like a darker version of the X-Files. The X-Files by this point obviously had become like a massive hit, and I don't know who would, I mean, obviously in the UK I don't know who's like who were the company behind it, whether it was the same company who released the X-Files or whether it was a rival. But yeah, Lance Henriksen, I think he played some sort of like detective or something. I don't remember that much about the show. I just remember watching the first season when it came out in the UK, which is probably maybe about a year later. But I just remember it being a really dark, interesting show, and I think it only lasted a couple of seasons. I'm sure Dan will know it. Maybe a few of the guys from the States will remember it. But it was just the first season. I think, as I say, I think it got cancelled like within like 2 seasons. But definitely worth checking out if you can find it somewhere. I don't even know whether it's available to stream anywhere.
There's a lot of shows like that just kind of disappeared because they were so short-lived.
Yeah. Obviously, talking about the X-Files, there was another show called Dark Skies, which was cancelled after 1 season or 2 seasons, which I adored, from 1996 as well, which was based, I think it was set in the 1960s, but it was to do with it was the whole UFO. It was another cash-in on the X-Files. So it was like the X-Files, but it was like set in the 1960s. But it was all based around, you know, I think it was like I can't remember if he was like a journalist or he was like some sort of like something to do with like the army or something. I can't really, it's a long, I'm going back 25, 26 years. But I just remember really, really enjoying the show. But it was just the whole, I'm just going to segue into something I wanted to discuss as well. Really, that's the whole, it is kind of pop culture, the whole UFO phenomenon of the 90s. I don't know how much you remember about it, but the 1990s from like the 94, 93 through to like 97, it was just like the world became obsessed with aliens and UFOs.
And it was all X-Files. That was all due to X-Files, man. Yeah, I remember that. They had all those documentaries. Like, I think that is when that video surfaced of the alien getting caught on film being dissected.
Yeah.
And it was just like a little rubber monster laying on a table.
But that was 1995 that dropped.
Was it? Okay.
It was all kind of like that time period was just kind of all, because I mean, if you think back to, well, 89 was like the Bob Lazar, who was like worked at like Area 51, and he kind of exposed, well, he exposed, it's whether he tells the truth. I don't know if you know who Bob Lazar is.
It sounds familiar.
He was on Joe Rogan a year or two ago. He basically, you've heard of Area 51, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, apparently he worked there in the 80s. Then he left. He quit in like 1989, but he went to basically he went rogue kind of and just like exposed what was going on there. And he claimed that they had UFO alien like intelligence, like crashed ships. They had alien bodies there. Now, is he telling the truth? Well, no, but we'll never know, really. You've got to take his word for it, or you don't take his word for it. I personally think he's probably lying. I don't know. I don't really trust the guy.
When was Chariot of the Gods? Do you know what I'm talking about? That documentary?
I think that's
it's the one that...
I think that was early 90s, maybe. I'm not sure.
That's one that we had on tape.
Is that Eric von Daniken? I think
it's the one that kind of shows like Egyptians, how they had like crazy drawings on stuff and like how they couldn't have built the pyramids. It was kind of about that. Dan might know what I'm talking about.
I think it's a guy called Eric von Daniken who like wrote a book, but I could be wrong. Dan says Bob Lazar actually has credibility. He's proved he tries to reason. I think the problem with Bob Lazar, if Dan's just to address Dan, Bob Lazar, he's kind of like aligned himself with this guy he was on Joe Rogan with, called Chris, I think Jeremy Corbell, and the guy's just, I don't trust the guy who he's aligned himself with when he does his interviews just comes across like a complete charlatan. And I just can't trust a word he says. And I think that even though Bob Lazar comes across as being a genuine guy, the guy who he's kind of like a spokesman, he just comes across like an absolute tool, like a really untrustworthy guy. I think that's probably what my issue with Bob Lazar is. It's just Chariot of the Gods, Dan says. Is that what Stargate was based? He said that's what Stargate was based on. Obviously, the movie Stargate.
I'm probably have the title wrong or something. This was a documentary that was kind of like just talking about. It's almost like Ancient Aliens, but it was like an earlier iteration of that, where they showed like cave drawings that implied that UFOs had visited the Egyptians and how they couldn't have built the pyramids and stuff. And we had it on tape, so I saw it like constantly. But I don't know if it was earlier than 96 or not.
I know there's a guy, an English guy, who's written quite a few books. He wrote a book called Fingerprints of the Gods, which is about looking into the Egyptian, how did they possibly build these pyramids without the blocks? How did they get them into place? And I don't know if he's hinted at like suggesting that it could have come from extraterrestrial help and stuff. I know a few people have suggested that without extraterrestrial help, how could they have possibly done what they did? I mean, I honestly don't know. I mean, I really don't know. I mean,
and plus some of those drawings that they did, man, where it was like, because I think that's why they called it Chariot of the Gods, because they had like a chariot, like they would have, but it had like what looks like rocket, like exhaust systems on it and stuff, and it's flying through the air.
Yeah. It's like I in terms of like UFO sightings as well, even now that these Navy guys off the coast of California have said they've been swarmed by like 50 UFOs, and I think, well, you've all got smartphones which can take it. It's like, well, show us some like good. It's always blurry footage. It's like, well, everybody's got a smartphone now with like crystal clear camera. So people are always putting like these amazing photographs on the internet, of like, the Northern Lights or, whatever, it's, so why can't we just see some like amazing footage of UFOs? It always seems to be, everybody's got a camera in the pocket now, but we don't really seem to be seeing
somehow
any
spottings have gone down for some reason.
Yeah. So, like, was the X-Files responsible for more sightings in the 90s? Possibly. That could be it, But
But as far as TV shows for me, how old were you in 96?
19.
See, like for me, TV was. Did you guys have TGIF over there?
No. No, clearly not, because I'm not sure what it is.
I was really wondering if this would be the biggest gap between us because you guys have completely different programming over there. But we had TGIF. It was on ABC Friday night. It was like a block of sitcoms like Family Matters and Step by Step and Hanging with Mr. Cooper, The Dinosaurs, stuff like that.
No, don't know. I'd say a sitcom that did debut in '96, which is still played every day in the UK, is Everybody Loves Raymond, which I really like. With
that was after. This was like it played all through the 90s, but this had been around since like 88, 89, something like that.
Yeah.
And that year, I'll be showing my age here because I was 12 years old. That year, Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
We got that. Yeah, we got Sabrina. Yeah, we got that.
Yeah, that was like.
I'm trying to remember what was, in terms of like what was big in the 90s in terms of American sitcoms. Obviously, Friends was massive in the UK. We got like Sabrina the Teenage Witch. That was like the kids' comedy, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We got Frasier was massive. Everybody Loves Raymond. And then even like some of the 80s sitcoms were still playing, like MASH was still on, and Cheers was still getting played. And I used to love Married with Children. I used to love Married with Children.
That was a big one back then. It was still on in 96, wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah, I think it kind of started. Yeah, definitely. I think it was definitely still going because I think Christina Applegate now is probably. I think she started off like as a late teen in the show, and
yeah, definitely.
And she's only now probably about 50. So she was probably. I think that was running until the late 90s. But like Married with Children is just like the sort of show that would never make it on TV now because it'd just be like Al Bundy's just been, if you look at just like making fun of fat people constantly and
that was I remember there was a big thing about people bitching about that show because it was like the first sitcom that wasn't wholesome. It was raunchy and people didn't like that, especially like Bible Belt people.
Well, I remember
the devil.
Pamela Anderson's in one episode.
Yeah,
in lingerie as well.
A lot of people were. David Boreanaz, he was in it as Kelly's one of Kelly's boyfriends, and like they had Sam Kinison on there all the time and stuff. There were a lot of cameos on that.
Yeah, I mean, just there's an episode where they go to the supermarket. I think, and literally, there's this blonde like bombshell just walking around with like tight top on, like denim shorts, and Al's literally just dropping stuff on the floor for her to pick up, and he's just like ogling her, and it's like that just would never fly in 2022, unfortunately.
Yeah, but dude, seriously though, if you didn't have Family Matters, that's a shame because that was like, have you heard of Steve Urkel at least?
Who?
Steve Urkel.
No.
Oh man, y'all missed out. You need to. That stuff still kind of holds up. You should go watch that stuff. Like it's Family Matters mainly. That's the big one. But Boy Meets World, Step by Step, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Dinosaurs, all that stuff was great. But Family Matters, like Steve Urkel was like a household name. Everybody did like the impersonation.
Yeah. DJ's in the chat. DJ mentions, have you seen or heard of Only Fools and Horses? I have. I don't think Chris will have. That was like one of our big sitcoms of the 80s and 90s. I'm not sure like whether any of our sitcoms or which ones.
We had British television on PBS.
Yeah.
And I remember I used to watch one called Mystery with an exclamation point. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, don't remember that one.
It was like a spinoff of Masterpiece Theater. It had a really cool opening, but it was just called Mystery. And I watched Mr. Bean all the time.
Yeah, I know Mr. Bean translated because Mr. Bean, because there wasn't really any sort of dialogue really, so it kind of didn't really need to be. It would translate to any country. You could show that in any country in the world, and it would.
Oh, you could tell it was British though, man.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of like, because there's very little dialogue, the humor was kind of like worldwide. There's a lot of like the British humor.
That stuff that's some of the funniest shit on the planet to this day. I used to love Mr. Bean. I watched it like religiously.
I mean,
and there was a couple of other sitcoms, but I don't remember their names. But yeah, they only showed on PBS, which is public broadcast service. Yeah. It was kind of like educational programming, and then at night they would show British television a lot.
I mean, if you've seen if you like Mr. Bean, I mean, it's totally different. But Mr. Bean, obviously, Rowan Atkinson did a sitcom called Blackadder in the 80s. Like, there's 4 seasons of it. And each season was like in a different time setting. I should say series for the UK guys. I'm sure people in the UK, when they say season, they like it's series, not season. But yeah, so each season. So season 1 was like set in like during like Elizabethan times, maybe. Or I think season 4 was the First World War. So every single season was like a different time period. With this, but there's always Rowan Atkinson playing the character. I mean, Blackadder was just one of the best sitcoms of the 80s in the UK. But I mean, and I think that sort of the humor in that would resonate as well in America. It would cross over well. But I think a lot of UK humor though just doesn't really translate that well to America. I think it's just there is quite a lot.
I mean, it does for me. I've always liked British humor.
Yeah,
just that because it's really, it's dry and subtle.
Yeah,
I think like most Americans like slapstick.
Yeah,
but I've always kind of dug British humor.
Right, so we'll move on to one. We have this one. Just looking at newsworthy events like for '96. A couple of
hold on, real quick. Hold on. I'm sorry, man, but Big T, yes, that opening and also there was the guys creeping up behind the dude, and the girl was laying on the pillar, passing out. It was the coolest opening. You should go Google the mystery opening. That's why I watched the show, because the opening was so cool. But it was like a cartoon opening with all this weird shit going on.
I'll have to make a note of that. Just a couple of newsworthy events. '96, obviously Tupac Shakur shot dead. That was kind of one was a big deal.
Shot dead, supposedly.
Yeah. The one that really stood out for me though is I'm not quite sure how familiar you are with this one. It was an American case. Like obviously, it was the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. It's like the little girl who was like killed. I think it was it Colorado?
I'm not sure where it was, but yeah, that was.
They never. That kind of like went worldwide, that story, and that was obviously they made films about that, and the parents were under suspicion, although they were never convicted. I think were they ever like. Was there anybody ever been gone to court over that? Or
I think that a few years ago I heard that the case was like being looked at again because of something the dad did, but it seemed like because again, like I was a preteen, my brain was still undeveloped, but like even then they were creepy as fuck. Like it seemed like to me they did it.
Well, apparently Big T shot Big Crack Rock shot Tupac, but he said he didn't do the Ramsey one. Well, that's okay. That's probably probably for the best. Anthony says, "Oh yeah, here's a good one. If you like the UK has great modern comedy, yeah, The Inbetweeners. Have you ever seen The Inbetweeners? Not the horrible American remake, which was terrible. The UK Inbetweeners. If you like politically incorrect, childish sort of humor, which is like very sort of like near the knuckle, it's definitely worth a watch. The American remake couldn't use a lot of the language because it's just full of like F words and like filthy language, and I think the Americans they allowed one F word an episode, whereas the British version is just constant F words throughout.
Was Space the big show over there?
It wasn't a big show. It was a cult. It was a cult show.
Because I love that show.
Yeah, it's basically what made Simon Pegg, got bored. It was never a big show. It was always like it was on late at night, on a Friday night. It was just one of those things that became, as time went on, became. Did you ever watch Red Dwarf?
Mm-mm.
No, it's like a sci-fi sitcom, from like the late 80s, early 90s. Although it carried on into the 2000s. It's if you like, I mean, sort of like wacky zany sitcom set in space with really bad sets and a really cheap look to it, but it's intentional. Like it's just check out Red Dwarf. It's a BBC show though, so it's hard. It's like a lot of these, if it's owned by the BBC, you won't find much on YouTube. You certainly won't find full episodes. It's really tough. The BBC are very tough on, stuff that's getting put out for free. It's hard. Yeah. You'd probably have to check out you'd probably have to order like a DVD or a Blu-ray online. But yeah, Red Dwarf's fantastic. Just really, really good. And like a lot of I think with British sitcoms as well, we don't tend to sort of we tend to like focus more on like keeping it short and focus on quality. I'm not saying that American sitcoms, they just seem to, a lot of American sitcoms, there'll be like 20 episodes to a season. And so the quality may just, diminish a little bit. Whereas like, I think the UK sitcoms, the good ones anyway, there'll be like 6 episodes and then that'll be it.
We'll see that. It's probably just that Americans, I mean, we want to milk something. If something's successful, like if NBC puts out a sitcom and it becomes a huge hit, whether it's good or not, they're going to milk that motherfucker until nobody wants to watch it anymore,
Yeah.
Whereas British television, they probably want to tell a story, and when the story is done, they move on.
Well, I'm just thinking like the Office. Obviously, the UK Office was like 2 seasons of 12 episodes, whereas the American Office went on for like 8-9 seasons. Which, how many episodes of the American Office was it? Like 100 or something? It's just
a lot. And like the American season of The Office was really the only episode that had that British humor, but it was done by Americans, so it just didn't translate right. And so you saw where, I mean, I love The Office, the American one, but from that first episode, they really had to change what they were doing because they were not pulling off that like awkward, like dry humor. They tried it in that first episode if you watch the pilot, and it wasn't working.
Yeah. I just got a notification. I just got a notification then for Dan's stream starting in half an hour. So, what I'll do is I wanted to keep it to around about 1 hour 45 anyway, because I see sometimes these live streams go for like 3.5 hours. I'm like, how do you even do that? And plus the fact that it's like 1:30 in the morning in the UK. But I thought, 1 hour, about 1 hour 45 is like a nice time for a stream. So basically, I think we've covered most bases, but obviously the one thing we haven't talked about is obviously Scream, which is obviously the main reason I chose 1996 as like the first year.
Hold on, let me also mention Snick. That was my TV on my TV list, and that was the last year they showed Pete and Pete. Now that was that was cable television. So did you guys have that, or is that different over there too?
No. I mean,
See, Snick was like Saturday Night Nick. There was a bunch of kid shows. How Are You Afraid of the Dark was on there, and there was this show called Pete and Pete, and it's one of the best shows like maybe ever made, in my opinion. And it's a kid's show, and it still holds up as an adult. It was really ahead of its time, and it's really funny. And that was the last year that showed. So,
no, I'll check that on YouTube. Sure, there'll be episodes on YouTube to check out. I'll have to check that out.
It's really like low budget, I guess is the word. It's really like bare bones, but it's a really good show.
Big T says, if anyone interested, Slackercast at midnight is going to do audio cinema tonight. That's midnight their time. It's probably going to be like 5 o'clock in the morning for me, so I'll probably be in bed. But I can try and catch it. I can catch it up later when I wake up. So going to talk about, obviously talking about Scream. Obviously, you know, that was the big one of the main reasons I wanted to choose 1996. It certainly wasn't for most of the films we discussed tonight, because, you know, 1996 was a pretty poor year. Looking back, it wasn't great. But obviously 1996, Scream dropped into December. And obviously, you know, the cultural impact of Scream on like horror, you know, going forward. I've always made this. I've made the case, you know, that I would say that Scream is one of the 3 or 4 most important horror films ever made, along with Psycho and Halloween. And, you know, yeah, pretty much. I think, you know, Psycho from 60, Halloween 78, and then I'd say Scream 96. If you look at like what it kickstarted, would we have got the Blair Witch Project? Maybe not, which that kicked off a whole found footage genre going into the 2000s. I mean, obviously something would have come along and kickstarted it, but it was Scream that did it. So, you know, it needed a film to kickstart the genre, because, like, you know, just look at like 1986. Look at what was getting released: Hellraiser, Bloodline. That was pretty much it for horror in 1986 up until December when Scream came out. Now, if we were to do a stream from 1987 or 1998, and then we looked at the releases that year, I think we'd see a massive increase in terms of what was considered horror then. So, I mean, what your memories of Scream? Did you watch it as a kid, like when it came out, or yeah?
Yeah, that was like it was almost like a validation movie, like, if that makes sense, like, because there was no internet back then. You didn't have forums. I was the only person I knew who liked horror movies as much as I did. No, if you met somebody who liked horror movies, it was in an extremely casual way. And so when you see Scream, and it's like they're making all these references and they're doing all these things that you catch, and like Randy is talking about stuff that you've never seen anybody in real life like understand that you knew about. It was like a inside joke movie for you if you grew up watching horror movies. And it was the first time that ever happened, and just kind of let you know that, like, because you know.
Had you seen all the Halloween movies by that point and all the Friday films, or were you
Most
still
of them?
Yeah.
Like, I'd definitely seen all the Elm Streets. I had seen probably all the Friday the 13th movies. Halloween, I would say I had seen 1, 3, 4, and 5 probably at that time.
Yeah.
But I hadn't seen like 6. I don't even think I knew 6 existed at that time. And I hadn't seen 2.
Ironically as well, 6 would have been out just the year before as well, but you're more aware of the older ones than 6, because 6 probably dropped and didn't, because 6 did 6 get a cinema release? I don't even remember whether
it did, but dude, I'm telling you, I didn't know it existed until years later. The marketing for that movie must have been whisper quiet because I didn't like, because I'm not a super Halloween fan. I like them a lot, but I'm not like the fanatic. So I didn't like follow Halloween news or anything. So I found out like years later that Part 6 even existed. I thought it went straight from 5 to H2O for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, 6 was. I mean, I didn't go to the cinema to see 6. That's what I can't even remember whether it came out in the cinema in the UK. It probably did, but I mean, I checked out on Halloween, back in the early 90s. It was just like by the time 6 came out, I was like, this franchise has just died a death now. It's just like I wasn't interested. But then obviously when Scream dropped, it just completely rejuvenated everything. I mean, like Halloween H2O would not exist about. Look at the way. Look at the look of H2O as well. It's got that sort of glossiness, that sheen that Scream's got, which
they use
almost
the same music too.
Yeah, maybe too much. Maybe it's maybe a little bit too much. It's got like that West. I mean, is Scream meant to be set in California? I've never really worked out where Woodsboro.
I think
it looks West Coast. It looks like it's got like a West Coast.
I always just kind of like assumed it was like Midwest, but I think it was supposed to be set in California. I just always took it as like a Midwest thing. I don't know why.
I can never remember whether they actually specifically stated which state it was meant to be set in. It always felt to me like that's like it just had that. It certainly didn't look like an East Coast movie. It had looked that. It just had that sort of like that sunny sort of like West Coast feel to it.
It was probably supposed to have like an every town quality to it.
Yeah. Which is, if you look at the Friday the 13th movies, the way they just jumped around with different locations, it always, that's why Camp Crystal Lake always feels totally different. It's like when you watch Jason Takes Manhattan and Camp Crystal Lake looks like Loch Ness.
It's fine, man. They're just on different parts of the lake. That's all.
Yeah. It's a damn big lake by Part 8, though.
I mean, it leads into the ocean, man.
Yeah, well, it has to. Yeah, but I mean, in terms of like Scream, in terms of the way they set up the opening scene as well, where it was kind of like, I don't think I'd ever seen a horror movie do that before, where certainly not kill off who you thought was going to be the main character. Because obviously this is before the internet, so going into it, Drew Barrymore was the name on the front of the poster. Her face was front and center. And then she just gets offed in the first 10 minutes. So
yeah, and I remember that being confusing. I was like, what?
Because obviously they then introduced a load of people we've never heard of before. Neve Campbell was unheard of, more or less. Courtney Cox obviously was being in Friends, but it was like, and then obviously the idea of bringing in, I mean, the great thing about Scream as well, it came along at just a time when mobile phones, or like cell phones as you call them, would just become a thing. So the killer could be mobile and while connected with, the target. If it had been a few years before when it was literally just, landlines, or you'd have to carry around this massive contraption, it wouldn't have worked. It was just came at the right time where the phones were small enough. You could carry them around. You could talk to them from any point. Obviously, just outside the house. That whole setup wouldn't have worked, a few years earlier. So they really made good use of technology, and that's the Scream franchise has always done that. It's always taken the new technology and moved forward, with maybe to the point now where it's probably a little bit. New technologies maybe can start impacting a lot of films, because like we always say, it's with modern technology now, you can nearly always get a phone signal. People can always know where you are with apps and stuff. At 1996, you had the cell phone, but technology was basic enough that you could still get away with doing the sort of stuff that they did in the 80s movies.
Yeah. Like the thought that a high school kid could clone a cell phone and be untraceable is not really a thing now.
No. But But yeah, I mean that was just that, and it just the mask was always a little bit. I always thought the mask was a little bit goofy looking, a little bit. And
I love the mask, man, because like the thing about that mask is whenever, because it's like a sad face, like a really like scared, sad face, however you read it. And so whenever he's like standing over you, or like whenever he like jiggles the keys, like it's almost like he's mocking you. That's like the thing I've always liked about that mask.
Did you like the way whoever plays Ghostface? Did you like the sort of the clumsy aspect of like falling over? And because there's always that's always been a trait, hasn't it, with Ghostface?
I never got it then. I didn't even notice it then, but now I appreciate it because I mean it was fucking Matthew Lillard. Like Stu was a goofy, clumsy kid, so every scene that he's supposed to be in, I mean that's a little bit of realism. A big, tall, lanky kid he's not going to be very sure-footed, so he's like tripping over his own feet and stuff. I like that.
I think as well with the Scream franchise, the character is not so much the people who play Ghostface; it's the voice. It's always been the voice rather than whoever is being more than the sum of its parts. It's even more so than the mask. It's whoever takes on the role of Ghostface. It's that hello Sydney with the voice alt. And one of the things that I think they dropped the ball with Scream 5 was that iconic line, hello Sydney. When we get it in Scream 5, she already knows who the killers are, or at least one of the killers is, or maybe both of them. So when they drop that line in Scream 5, I'm thinking it should be a shock. It should be earlier on in the movie. It's like I don't like that in Scream 5. The way she's right at the finale of the film, she knows who the killers are, and at that point, you say hello Sydney. It's that for me should have always been that. It's always the setup's always the same in every movie. First one, second one, third one, fourth one. I can't quite remember when it happens in the movie, but I'm sure it happens before she knows who the killers are. And I think with Scream 5, that was just a mistake. They should have put that iconic line in a lot earlier in the film.
Well, I think that's part of the difficulty of like the struggle the franchise is in right now, where like everybody, they either want her or they demand that she gets removed from the storyline. So like if they're trying to move away from that, they kind of need to subtly push it out of because it is iconic, but it doesn't need to be if Sydney's not going to be in the movies anymore, that you're not ever going to hear that line again. So they kind of need to, like, if they're going to push forward without her, they need to move away from that. And it's like they just got to rip the Band-Aid off.
I'm still not entirely sure what's going on with her in Scream 6. Is she going to be in it, or is she not going to be in it? Or Twitter seems to be...
Well, at Thing with Two Heads podcast, that guy, Sean Clark, said that he knows Neve Campbell, and she said, like, it's bullshit. She's not going to be in it.
That sounds...
I just don't want it to ruin the trilogy they got. The franchise deserves a good trilogy. If they wrote her in, and now they have to do rewrites, that's why the first three suck. Because they had to do rewrites because of political bullshit and stuff. Like, I don't care if she's in it or not. I just don't want the movies to suck. I want the movies to be good. I want it that trilogy they're working on to be as good as it deserves to be. I don't want it to get fucked up over money. Because I like the Scream movies a lot. I'm a pretty big fan of them, and I want these three to be good. And the first one's a really good start.
I mean, I love the first two. 3 was... I don't like 3 at all. 4...
I like 3 in a funny way. It's a funny movie. You got Jay and Silent Bob running around.
I mean, 4. I'm sort of torn. I think I prefer 5 to 4. To be honest,
I don't like 4. Like, well, I don't hate it or anything, but it's my least favorite easily. They messed it up.
What was once Halloween ends? And Ben says, "What will we talk about once Halloween ends and Scream ends?"
Well, by then we'll be getting a new Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. So we can start talking about that.
we can only dream. Hopefully. Well, I think that just about wraps things up to tonight. We've been going for an hour and 45, which was kind of what I was aiming for. I think we covered most bases when it comes to 1996. Just want to say thank you for Chris for jumping on board.
No problem.
Do you want to plug your channel?
Yeah, it's Slash Your Home Video. Check it out. I'm not very good at promoting myself.
Well,
so, go check it out.
Yeah. If you're not subscribed to Chris, Slash Your Home Video on YouTube, check him out, because us small guys have got to promote each other, because nobody else is going to do it. Anyway, thanks for jumping on board, man. Everyone in the chat, I'll go through everyone in the chat, but there's a lot of people that jumped on tonight. It's been really good. We'll probably maybe look at doing something else similar, maybe in about 4 to 6 weeks, pick another year from the 90s and do that. I was looking at maybe doing not covering every year of the 90s, maybe picking maybe a year from the early 90s, like 91, 90, 92. And maybe covering maybe something like 99, just gives us
we got to hit 97, man.
Well,
we can always talk about Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Oh, well, that's always an option. But we'll probably try and maybe do this maybe every 4 to 6 weeks, covering a few years. So everyone in the chat, thanks for jumping on. Chris, thank you very much for being a guest, and I will see you next Tuesday night. Thank you, everyone. Bye.